We have a very dynamic lineup for this conversation tonight, and before we dive in, I'm pleased to say that the Renewal Awards and tonight's gathering are made possible by Allstate. Our thanks to the Allstate team for its many, many years of great support. And on that note, it gives me great pleasure to invite Allstate's Chris Redd to say a few words. Chris is Territory Sales Leader for Pennsylvania. Chris, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. How is everybody? Excellent, excellent. Anybody ready for the hockey game tonight? There we go. Good, good. Margaret, thank you. The Atlantic has been a great partner to Allstate since 2009. And so it's a pleasure to come together once again with some of our old friends. First, on behalf of Allstate, welcome to each of you, and thank you for spending part of your evening with us. It feels great to be here focusing on people driving real, positive change in Pittsburgh. The pride Pittsburgh residents have for the city is well-deserved. The devoted sports culture. Okay, this is participation time. Go with me. Let's go Pens! The energy of the young people drawn by universities in the area and the determination to find innovative solutions to pressing challenges is all part of why the Steel City has become synonymous with reinvention, and that's a good thing. We're here to celebrate those innovators and change makers responsible for helping to renew Pittsburgh and to make it the vibrant, thriving community it is today. That's what the Renewal Project is all about. Local organizations working to improve their community from the ground up. One goal of the Renewal Project is to share inspiring stories of individuals who are making communities stronger and helping people live a good life every day. We will elevate their work from a neighborhood conversation to a national conversation. By now, I hope you've walked around a bit and seen how we are bringing the Renewal Project to life, whether it's through Renewal Awards, social media, poll data, or events and spaces just like this where local entrepreneurs work to improve their community. As Margaret mentioned, Allstate and the Atlantic launched the Renewal Awards in 2015 to spotlight and celebrate local innovators and entrepreneurs. The definition of renewal is to restore, refresh, and make new again. That's at the heart of what we do. And as I said, that's why we're here today. The Renewal Awards recognize people who take action and encourage innovators who drive change in Pittsburgh and in neighborhoods across America. Personally, I'm delighted to be here tonight. If you stop by our polling station, you might have noticed the feeling is mutual. According to our poll, 83% of residents believe Pittsburgh's renewal has been successful at revitalizing jobs, housing, and community neighborhoods, and it's contagious. Given Pittsburgh's renewal, almost all surveys respondents, 93% to be exact, feel it's possible for other cities to overcome challenges and renew themselves into thriving communities. We also saw a tremendous eagerness for new ideas and solutions at the local level. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. The top two words that Pittsburgh residents use to describe our city are proud and resilient. Encouraging the spirit of innovation, supporting small businesses, and driving positive change is all part of how Allstate empowers people to live a good life every day. As a network of more than 10,000 small business owners, with over 45 Allstate agencies in the area, we see the impact of creative, local problem solving firsthand. Our agency owners are active in dozens of local communities and organizations that work to strengthen Pittsburgh and help people live a good life every day. We do actually have one local Allstate agent in the crowd with us tonight. I'd like to introduce to you Dana Richter from Pittsburgh. And I will tell you, she is at the forefront of community involvement in the Pittsburgh area. So it's easy to see how the Renewal Awards and Renewal Project are a great fit for Allstate. We are a force for good in the communities we serve. As a company, we believe in supporting local innovators who are working hard to improve the lives of others. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Stacy Drumtra. Stacy is going to introduce you to three incredible individuals working to improve communities around the country and help others live a good life every day. Thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Since 2009, Allstate and the Atlantic media have tried to understand the struggles of communities since the Great Recession, and that has led us 6 years later to the Renewal Project. We are moving from insights to action. The Renewal Project is all about spotlighting and celebrating people who are creating a path towards renewal and growth. We're looking for local innovators who work tirelessly and mostly under the radar to improve their communities. Our goal is to elevate their stories to a national audience. So tonight I want to introduce you to Aaron, Marcus, and Stefani, just a few of the inspiring individuals that we've been in contact with through the Renewal Project. In this video, you'll meet people who are dedicated to being a force for good in their community. While you may not find them on the cover of magazines or the front page of the local paper yet, we're working on that, you are guaranteed to find them hard at work planting the seeds of hope that bring about renewal in communities across the country. So I invite you to join me in listening to their stories and celebrating the accomplishments of these phenomenal innovators.
Participation, I think, can come in a lot of different ways. It can be about voting, it can be about protesting, it can be about standing up for what's right, and it can also just be about saying you know what, I think something should be different here, and I'm going to be the one who leads that change.
What does it look like to serve so many years inside of prison where all you can do is dream? And then you come home, and what you find is that everything that you dreamt about now is blocked by huge, huge barriers.
In Alexandria, there's a lot of families in need, and women, I believe, are the backbone of those families. And if they don't have help, and if they don't have the ability to get into the workforce and make a living, their families are going to suffer.
I think that the way that people are able to make change in their communities is pretty slow, and it's really hard, and it's under the radar. Being a citizen in this country is about stepping up and doing what you need to do.
The Flickshop School of Business, what we want to do is we want to be able to help those guys who come home from prison. We want to help them navigate through what that blockade looks like, and so then we can help them either jump over it or jump around it or communicate with those that allow those walls of Jericho to easily tumble down.
Together We Bake, the recipe is job training, personal development, empowerment, and support, and that helps women get back on their feet with some new skills and confidence and a desire to live a positive life.
IOB finds people who have great ideas for their neighborhoods, and we work with them to make them great citizen leaders. I think a lot of people are inspired by other leaders on IOB. They might see a mom who started a project to put up crosswalk flags near a dangerous intersection and get inspired by that and try something out like that in their own neighborhood.
One of my favorite students, Robert. Robert was an amazing man. He was an incredible man. He served 19 years in prison. He came home and he enrolled in one of our classes. I want to help elevate the stories of the Roberts because these are the success paths that you're going to see of the guys coming out of my class.
We want people to know that change is possible, and small things can actually have a really big impact. My name is Erin Barnes.
Stefani Wright.
Marcus Bullock.
And Renewal starts in Brooklyn.
Renewal starts in Alexandria.
Renewal starts here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Allstate. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Stacy. So we promise you we're going to get you out of here in time for hockey, for baseball, for a good book, or for bed, whatever you do when you leave. But in any case, I want to let everyone know that, as Stacy just described, we're going to start our call for nominations for this year's Renewal Awards. And as we said, we're looking for people who are making significant difference in their communities, and that's anywhere in this country. There's actually too much to detail right here, but anybody who's interested, everything you could possibly want to know is at therenewalproject.com. I have a few other quick practical notes before we get started. Would everybody please make sure your cell phones are silenced, but don't put them away, because we would love you to join the conversation on Twitter. We're using the hashtag Renewal Series. And we also want you to be part of the conversation in the room too, and we'll have time for your questions along the way. And with that, let's get rolling. Please welcome Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto. Mayor. Mayor, I suspect you need no introduction, but you were born here in the city, correct?
From a faraway place called Scott Township.
Okay. And this is not exactly breaking news. He won yesterday's Democratic primary. By a lot. And he's running for re-election in November against no one? Not yet, anyway. And he's here to talk to, sorry about that. And he's here to talk about life in this city with my great colleague, Atlantic senior editor, Ron Brownstein. Take it away.
Thanks. You know, I've been covering politics for almost 35 years, and you know, when I was looking at the schedule for this event, I said, now, there's a guy with a lot of confidence in his polling. Because this would have been a very different event if the primary had turned out differently. But I want to ask you, having just been through this primary, what did it tell you about what people are satisfied with and dissatisfied about in terms of what's happening in the city?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and I don't know if Pittsburgh's unique about this, but my pollster had to go back and check the numbers twice when asked if you felt that the city was going in the right direction. We had similar numbers to what the Allstate poll had. I think our numbers were 80% yes. And she said that that's not something that you see around this country. And there's a confidence in where the city is and what the potential is for it moving ahead. We went through 50 years of decline, and it's almost like the storm's starting to clear and the clouds are starting to spread, and people can see that there is new opportunity for growth. Now, we became very good at managing decline. The idea of what we do with growth is an unknown. But like every city in this country, we also see the disparity that has happened over the past 30 years. And we have also worried that this new growth could heighten that disparity.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But let's start with the growth, because this project, this renewal project, has been looking at how communities around the country have been dealing with big economic change and how they've been responding. And as we have been in other cities in the Midwest, I have heard mayors and community leaders specifically cite Pittsburgh as a place that has essentially made the transition from a declining industrial city into a growing post-industrial city. Now, that's not the whole story. Obviously, the shale gas revolution has contributed to your growth in recent years, but to the extent it is the story, to the extent you have been able to go from, as you say, managing decline in a kind of industrial economy to building this and all the things like this, what have been the keys in making that happen over the past several decades?
Well, it's the overnight success story that took 30 years.
Yeah.
So it was back in 1979, and I always use the expression, the Pirates won the World Series, Willie Stargell. We are family.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
It's been a while.
The Steelers won their fourth Super Bowl in 6 years, and Pittsburgh died. It was the year that the economic collapse began. We went through the 1980s with 19% unemployment.
Incredible numbers, yeah.
Triple what Detroit's is today. Higher debt ratio of city government than New York City's when they went bankrupt, and lost more people than New Orleans lost after Katrina, and they never came home. So we hit rock bottom. And it was back in 1979 that Carnegie Mellon University created the first robotics program in the world. It was in the 1980s that they created the first PhD program. It was a little hospital up in Oakland that decided they were going to go after NIH funding, ended up becoming the fourth largest research development funder of NIH, and created the biggest employer in the state of Pennsylvania, UPMC. It was these steps that were being taken in the eds and meds and technology industries that completely transformed, but it wasn't a master plan. It wasn't where we all got together and said this is what would happen. It was when economic collapse was just ruining this entire region. Our basic foundations turned a red light district into a cultural district, built the Warhol Museum, built the Carnegie Science Center. We're able to build culture and arts. And it was our corporate community that doubled down on our downtown and building the skyscrapers under the vision of our first renaissance of turning an industrial business district with trains running to factories into, in the 1970s, the third largest corporate center in America.
I wonder, what did this experience teach you? Because you noted foundations, educational institutes, private sector, public sector. As mayor now, what lessons have you taken from this long period about the way all of these different sectors interact? And what is the role of the public sector amid all of these other forces in a community? I
think cities that come to visit and study Pittsburgh call it the Pittsburgh way. We're so accustomed to it that we just think that it's natural. You know, it was back in the 1940s when Mayor David Lawrence partnered with our corporate community to create the first public-private partnerships in American history. They created the Allegheny Conference. The first thing they did was clean the air. They didn't wait for federal government to come here or to create an EPA. We created the first Clean Air Act in American history. We cleaned our water. We worked to transform our industrial city into a corporate city. And it was that partnership that was able to move it forward. Going back into the 1980s, it was the foundation community that kept this region's head above the water while we were dying economically. It was the large institutions that helped to transform our economy. Everyone plays a part. So when we look at the challenges and we look at things like that disparity, we can't tackle affordable housing alone as a city. We need partners. We need the large nonprofit institutions, the corporations, and the foundations to partner with us to provide opportunity for everyone to be a part. We need partners to be able to realize that if we can get the kids that are 3 and 4 years old, we have a chance to get them to start out of the gate at the same level in kindergarten. But we can't do it alone. We need those partners. So it's the Pittsburgh way. It's understanding that your mission is beyond your corporate bottom line. Your mission in Pittsburgh is a civic duty as well. You talked about the foundations being so critical in keeping the region afloat when it was at the lowest ebb. There's something very powerful about the idea of the wealth created in the first industrial revolution, in effect, a century later, kind of helping lead the region into its kind of post-industrial future. We have the most philanthropic dollars per capita of any city without a guy named Gates living in it. Now, start with the good news, then get to the tougher part. Good news, Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program report. Between 20 and 2015, Pittsburgh's standard of living grew 13%, annual wages grew nearly 9%, and productivity grew nearly 10%. Look at it all, they ranked at third out of the 100 large metro areas in increasing prosperity. What's been the key to that level of growth coming out of the Great Recession? Specialized industries that have additional training and education that's necessary for employment that increases wages. We've also seen some of the assistance in helping those that are towards the bottom of the ladder in skills and training to be able to see some wage increases. But the backside of that, and I'm sure you're going to get to that. That's where, right there, is for those that aren't seeing that increase, they're actually seeing a massive decrease, and it really falls along the lines of race. Yeah, you know, the Policy Link, who has been working, a group that we have done some joint studies with ourselves around the country, has been working here. They said in 2016, over the past 5 years, racial gaps in wages, employment, and poverty have widened rather than narrowed, ranking Pittsburgh 78th among the 100 largest metros when it comes to progress on racial economic inclusion. Why are gaps widening precisely as the city is gaining overall? Access to quality housing, access to quality education, access to quality health and mental health care, which the disparity has grown significantly more, and even with the acts of Congress recently, we'll see that even increase more. And then in the city of Pittsburgh, we don't have a black middle class. We have low-income neighborhoods, and then people all throughout the city who are in the middle class. And so many people, when they get to a certain level, if they can leave, they leave. So let me use this example. In 2000 to 2010, or 2001 to 2011, the census numbers came out. The council district I represented which was around the universities, grew by 10%. The first time anything's grown in the city since the 1950s. The council district right next to me, represented by Reverend Burgess, lost 24% of its people. Almost 1 out of every 4 people left. 2001 to 2011, we weren't seeing gentrification. What was pushing the people out was no investment, high crime. The communities themselves seeing this as the greatest threat. And we never talked about it. We never talked about black flight and how folks were moving into Penn Hills. They were moving further east towards Monroeville and other places. And so we have right now a community that sees everything that's going on, but has no ladder of access to see and be a part of it.
And we'll talk about that. I ask a question to the audience. How many people here were not born in the area? Not born in the area, right. So a couple years ago, we were doing one of these events. I was talking to John Hickenlooper when he was mayor of Denver, and he called it the Denver paradox. He said, we have built a community and an economy that is attracting talented people from all over the country and indeed all over the world. But we can't put our own kids from low-income neighborhoods on a track where they can be equipped to compete for the jobs that we are creating.
Right.
Is that true here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what we do is we go back to the Pittsburgh way. So pulled together the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the head of People's Natural Gas, the head of PNC Bank, Federated Investors, the superintendent of Pittsburgh Public Schools and his assistants, and said, how can we start career learning opportunities in 7th grade? How can we give the kids in Pittsburgh Public Schools an advantage over the suburban kids in knowing exactly what are you going to need at People's Natural Gas? What are the skills you're going to be looking for? And how can we get them by the time they graduate an opportunity to be able to succeed? Today we had a signing day. You know how you have signing days for sports? Today there will be 1,500 Pittsburgh Public School kids that graduate. Today 1,300 of them stood up and said what they're going to be doing next. I'm going to work and where they're going to work. I'm going into the military. I'm going to a trade school. I'm going into a university. 1,300 of the 1,500 have a path after high school. We have to get that to 1,500.
I know the Pittsburgh Public Schools recently announced a 5-year plan to try to close the racial gaps in achievement. Obviously, a lot of things are going to have to be done to do that. But when you kind of look at that large challenge, where do you focus? Where do you think you can make the most bang?
So, and where we're going to really put the commitment of financial funds going and knocking on the doors to the other partners in Pittsburgh is in pre-K education for every 3- and 4-year-old. That's the first. I spoke at, I read, I love reading to kids, and last Friday I was at Lincoln Elementary and I was reading to first graders. And as I was reading to them and I'm asking them to read with me, it became very evident that the 2 kids here, they're reading like at a 3rd grade level. They're just brilliant. And then the little kid right in front of me couldn't read or write. And by the time he goes into 2nd grade, he's going to be even further behind. By the time he gets into 3rd grade, he's going to lose interest. 4th grade, 5th grade. But he was very clever to hide it, to try and do everything he could to not have to read. But it was also very evident. So if we can get those 3rd and 4-year-olds to be able to improve the cognitive abilities of these kids, and then by the time they're starting in kindergarten, they're at that same level, it'll be the biggest thing we can do.
Is this primarily an equity issue or a growth issue? I ask because, in preparing for this, I saw the report from, I think it was the Allegheny Conference on Community Development, and you noted this is an older, population. It said Pittsburgh would need 34,000 new workers every year through 2025 to replace those leaving the workforce. Are you on track to produce that workforce, or could this constrain your growth if you can't get more of your own kids in position to compete?
No, we're not anywhere close. We have a deficit of about 70,000 people to just replace the jobs that we know will need to be replaced, and that includes understanding how many of them will be graduating from our schools throughout this region. So we have to bring people in, but the best opportunity we can do is the ones that aren't being accounted for, that aren't going to have the skills to fill that, give them the skills.
And they're here.
Yeah. So we created with Pittsburgh Public Schools last year the first academy for public safety. So starting in 10th grade, we're training kids at Westinghouse to become police officers, to become firefighters, to become medics. because I need people. And instead of trying to just match diversity, I'd like to be able to match neighborhoods. I'd like to have 3 officers from Beltshoover and 2 from the north side, and having kids growing up here to be a part of these jobs. I need to hire people, and I need to find people too.
Another slice of replenishing this workforce. You are like a number of mayors in the industrial heartland who have viewed immigration as an important source of maintaining a younger population, replenishing that working age population. You've had your Welcoming Pittsburgh initiative since 2014. Yeah. Where do immigrants and immigration fit into your vision for this city?
Well, we didn't have any for 40 years because we didn't have jobs. My grandfather came here because there was a place to work. And then when we didn't have jobs, people stopped coming to Pittsburgh. Now with this, we have an opportunity, but we also have to be a city that is welcoming. There's probably images of Pittsburgh in some people's minds that it isn't a welcoming city because of its lack of disparity. But at the same time, there are so many people in the city that realize that understand that before it was a different group, it was our grandparents or our parents who were the ones that were said that they don't want in this country. So there's a history throughout the heartland that we built America through the immigrants that came over a generation ago. We have the opportunity now not to use their backs and their arms in a mill or a mine, but to use their minds in different ways to see this new economy grow.
Do you consider Pittsburgh, however you define the term, to be a sanctuary city?
Yes.
And you do. And then therefore, what do you make of the efforts from the Justice Department? What
Unconstitutional. Just simply unconstitutional. There have been Supreme Court rulings that have stated that the federal government, under the 10th Amendment, does not have the power to take over a local police force. If it isn't a part of the original Constitution of what the powers are of the federal government, it goes to the states. So back about a decade ago, there was a bill passed that would require every local law enforcement would have to register every handgun. And it was the big liberal Anton Scalia who wrote in the majority opinion that under the 10th Amendment, it is unconstitutional to have the federal government mandating upon a local government. States can do it, federal government can't. And this idea that you can then take away money has also been proven to be unconstitutional as well. So the legal merits of what they're doing and threatening are not meeting the merits of the Constitution of this country.
Talk more broadly about the new president made a cameo appearance in your, more than a cameo, kind of featured appearance in your advertising. Yep. What does his agenda, his domestic agenda, mean for Pittsburgh? What most concerns you? And is there anything you see that you might be able to work with?
So we worked quite closely with the Obama administration. I mean, on a weekly basis, we worked to eradicate veterans' homelessness with the First Lady. We had, when we came in 2014, over 400 homeless vets in the city. Today it's less than 40. And over 90% of them we've found homes, and every month we have about 20 new, but within 89 days we have a place for them to live. We created a really strong program with a Veterans Leadership Program in Pittsburgh. My Brother's Keeper, even the things that we've worked around Metro 21 of partnerships with the universities. There was a strong emphasis on urban domestic policy. We've had one meeting so far with the new administration, but there's been no emphasis. There has been no domestic policy. So we have to go it alone, and that is okay, because you go back to that Pittsburgh way of doing things, we can solve problems. When our economy tanked, there was no federal bailout for us. We did what Pittsburghers know how to do. We rolled up our sleeves, we went to work, and we solved it. It may have taken 30 years, but the reason that people are looking at Pittsburgh now is because how far back we were and how far we've come.
Before I bring in the audience, speaking of going it alone, you have been at the forefront of the experiment on self-driving cars with Uber. What have you learned so far? Is that technology ready for prime time, first of all?
Yes, the technology has been. So back in 2007, CMU ran a vehicle all the way from Los Angeles to New York. But going back into the 90s, they were able to take a vehicle from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. and back. That's before cell phones. 2007, the iPhone was just invented. There weren't even apps. I don't even know what technology they were using back then, but the technology today definitely is able to do it. So we have Uber in town. We have Delphi, who's partnering now with BMW. We have Aurora, who's partnering with Tesla. We have Ford and Argo AI. We have Carnegie Mellon and GM. We have become the center of artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles. And there are more coming.
And do you feel they're safe?
Yeah.
You're not worried about that?
I worry about 17-year-olds that are texting.
Yeah. But you've raised concerns about Uber itself and what it is sharing and how it's contributing to the community.
Go back to the Pittsburgh way. So the conversations that we had early on were basically why they should leave Silicon Valley, come to Pittsburgh. And we made a very compelling argument. Number one, look at all the talent we have here. And number two,
much better pizza.
Much better pizza. And we also have a city government that's willing to work with you. We're willing to take the risks in order to be able to do this. And those were the reasons they are investing $1 billion in the city and 1,000 employees.
So what has concerned you?
What's concerned me is they don't follow the Pittsburgh way, which is what can we do now to help you? Now, we know there will be a societal disruption with the economic disruption of the fourth industrial revolution. But do we know what we can be doing right now to make sure that we limit that disruption? What can we do to making sure that the drivers who your model is not to have them drive cars have the job training in place so that 10, 20 years from now, they're in a different career and it's better?
Because as you know, in many states, for men without a college degree, driving of one sort or another is the #1 employer.
So what are we doing? Great example, Pittsburgh led the second industrial revolution, but we created air that was dangerous to breathe, water that was poisonous to drink, and the greatest disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It took us over 30 years and 40 years to be able to rectify those issues. Now we can go back and do the same mistakes again, or we can put into place different ways that they'll never have to deal with those types of issues. And that's what Uber has not been the partner with, what we want to see.
Let's take some questions. What do we have? All right, over here, yeah. Try.
Oh,
yeah,
there
you
we go.
Yep.
Good. So I'm actually an investor in one of the startups here, and my day job is working for one of the large tech companies that recently moved into town. One of the things that does concern me, I've lived in Pittsburgh 12 years now. I worked at CMU and then moved on to the corporate world. Is that, when I drive to see my in-laws, I drive through Turtle Creek, Wilmerding, McKeesport, North Versailles, Pitcairn. Most of these are Pittsburgh's getting revitalized, but there's all these neighborhoods that fall outside of the city of Pittsburgh that really are suffering. And I don't think they've seen the rise in incomes and quality of life that people living in the more posh parts of town might have seen. How do you go about working with these municipalities that have been left behind and bring the entire greater Pittsburgh area up?
On a personal level, I don't. So I work to try and improve Belts Hoover and Knoxville, Sheridan, and the other neighborhoods within the city. But I partner with the county executive on ways that we can then deal with the other municipalities. Unfortunately, we're #1 when it comes to the most fragmented government structure in America. 130 governments for 1.2 million people. And because of those little imaginary borders that are around there, you entrap disparity within it. You entrap it with the school districts, you entrap it with the municipalities. What I would do and what I try to talk to my Mon Valley friends about is don't think that you're bringing back the big mill. Quit the idea that we have to build a highway in order to rip through these areas in order to transport big steel. What you need is a light rail system that can connect you right to Oakland where the jobs are and redevelop your communities around bedroom communities where people live, quality of life, where you can have that backyard that you want in the suburban lifestyle. But don't just keep thinking that the mills are coming back. The employment centers are going to be in Oakland and downtown, in the airport. They're not going to be in Duquesne, into those other areas. And the entire idea of spending $3 billion on a limited access toll road is crazy. Well, the funding's already been earmarked by the state government in order to build the Monfayette extension from the Mon Valley to Monroeville. But having a brownfield site that connects to a shopping mall is not the economic development strategy that those communities need. And they get very upset when I say it, but it's very true.
I know we got to let you go, but can I follow up on that? Because thinking about it within the boundaries of the city, this question that many, as you said before, you've gone from the problems of decline to managing the problems of success. And one of the problems of success is rising housing prices that produce displacement. I read that there have been community meetings where people have brought signs, Black Homes Matter. Obviously you want to bring in people with income, you want new development, but how do you balance that against the risk of displacing longtime residents, and how do you manage that?
Well, I think every city in the country, and certainly around the world, is facing that right now, as people return back to cities. The opportunity has to be two-track. In cities that have lost population like Pittsburgh, we still need to build our tax base. So we still need to have a strong market rate housing initiative that sees new housing come in. That's how we pay to have cops on the street, keep our schools open, pave our streets. But at the same time, we have to incentivize affordability, to be a partner with developers that are willing to do 20%, 30%, 40% affordable. We'll provide tax incentives, grants, and others. But there's a bigger way to deal with it. In cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, we have an abundance of vacant property.
You have space.
We have 17,000 properties, 17,000 abandoned and blighted homes, empty lots. What I have to do is wed that to the need for affordable housing and make it home ownership and not rental. Unfortunately, HUD doesn't have a program that allows you to work with nonprofits and neighborhood groups, so we have to create our own.
Yeah, great. Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Hope 6 doesn't do that? Hope 6 doesn't do that? But not with CDCs. Really great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ron, don't go too far.
I'm not going too far.
It's now my pleasure to introduce 4 people who've been critical to Pittsburgh's comeback and are working to create opportunity for everyone who calls this city home. Please welcome Andrew Moore. He's Dean of the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. Before joining Carnegie Mellon, Andrew Moore helped open Google's first offices in Pittsburgh. Welcome, Andrew. Presley Gillespie is CEO of Neighborhood Allies, a community organization working to create thriving neighborhoods in the city. Welcome. And Stefani Pashman is CEO of Partner for Work, a nonprofit that connects people with meaningful job opportunities. And Kevin McMahon, President and CEO of Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. The organization's purpose is to make Pittsburgh a capital of world-class art and entertainment. I gather he is often called Pittsburgh's art czar. He suggested I not say that. But then we decided it was irresistible. So welcome, everybody, and back to you, Ron.
Given everything that's going on in Washington, the whole czar thing has become much more suspect. So I totally understand your reticence. As we were talking about with the mayor, in the 1980s, I think the first time I was here was in the 1980s, Pittsburgh was about as down as a city could be, with astronomical unemployment levels, flight of population, and now it is in a much better place. And as I said, we have been in other cities where in the Midwest and Youngstown might be one, that have held up Pittsburgh as a model of how you move from a declining industrial economy to a growing, largely post-industrial economy centered around meds and eds and tech and culture. So let me start by asking each of you, and Andrew, maybe we'll start with you and just kind of move down the row. Where do you see Pittsburgh making the most progress over the past generation? And where does that leave the city with the greatest needs still to address?
Very good. Pittsburgh has become extremely strong at world-class technology. Not everyone in the city can be doing that, but when places around the world want the very hardest questions to be answered in computer science or engineering, and I want to recognize my co-dean, Jim Garrett, head of our engineering department, they come to Pittsburgh in preference these days to New York or Boston, and frequently for many applications, Silicon Valley. Its biggest problem, and the thing I'm terrified about right now, is that we are absolutely running out of trained people. You can't be the center of the world if you've only got a few tens of thousands of qualified engineers.
Before I go on, so how did it get to that point? You know, from being Steel Town, steel goes away. It obviously had great educational resources. A lot of places have substantial educational resources, but they weren't able to kind of leverage and focus them in a way that became quite as economically relevant. What was the key to achieving that kind of technological preeminence that you're talking about?
So this is my personal experience. I moved to Pittsburgh in '93 after things were really bad. And the reason I and many other people have wanted to stay is the culture. In Pittsburgh, we tend to get things done because, and I'm not just saying this, this is absolutely what's different from here in Silicon Valley, for example. A gang of us together have some higher goal and we pull together to go after it, as opposed to lots of people have their own individual goals and then try to sort of use each other to hit them. That's, I actually think, the distinguishing factor.
Yeah. Presley, let me come back to you in a minute. But Stefani, what would you say? What has been the change? What has allowed the recovery that we've seen to this point, and what is the biggest challenge that has left the city, the area with?
Sure. So I think picking up on what Andrew was talking about, the fact that we have been able to develop a very diversified economy beyond, I mean, the technology is obviously preeminent across all of our jobs, but more importantly, we're very diversified, which creates opportunity. And what you see when you have that also is you have a lot of common occupations and needs across them, which creates a lot of opportunity for people and jobs. What's missing is we have a real bridge that is missing to communities and to individuals who've been left out. We've been spending a lot of time recently talking about a number of 40,000, which is the number we see of people who are either underemployed or unemployed in our midst, and very much focused in the neighborhoods that the mayor just discussed, that we have a lot of pockets of real need, and we have to find ways to bridge the technological advancements to the people that are living in our midst.
You would think if there was one problem in the city, it would not be a shortage of bridges.
That is true.
But nonetheless.
We just got to build the right ones.
Yeah. Kevin, your perspective, I mean, you were here at the low point.
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
I've been here only 15 years.
15 years. Okay, so you were here after
But
also.
the cultural trust and the cultural district was a part of that, as the mayor said, a part of that success. There's no question. The difference, I think, now, and there's so many people in this room that I think are a part of that. Again, what Andrew said and others have said, that it is a partnership. That's that kind of unusual thing. Having spent 10 years in Washington before Pittsburgh and 10 years in New York City before that, the culture here was so different. People actually talk to one another and collaborate with one another and get things done together. And certainly that was the truth about the cultural district, for sure.
Yeah. President, I saved you for last because you came here from Youngstown, which is another place where I have been that has been struggling to make the transition from a very proud industrial past to something else. Looking at that and being here, in your view, what were the assets that allowed Pittsburgh to get to where it is, and where has that left still to be done?
Well, I think, as has already been discussed, the cultural assets and the amenities, from world-class museums to world-class universities to world-class cultural assets like parks and green space. I think those are the types of assets that certainly attracted me to Pittsburgh, and I think it's attracting lots of millennials, lots of upwardly mobile students to the city, as well as executives. I think what the challenge is, we're not attracting diverse talent. We're not attracting minority leaders. We're not attracting minority executives, because what happens is when folks get here and they don't see the diversity, they don't see the culture for diverse African Americans, immigrants, and others, they stay for a couple of years and leave. So that's a very, very critical piece that we need to address wholeheartedly, full steam ahead, because absent that, that's going to stifle our growth. And it's really an imperative.
One thing I didn't get to ask the mayor about was his promulgation of basically the Rooney Rule within municipal hiring, and potentially that having a spillover effect. But what is the answer to what you're describing? Because you're in essence saying a chicken and egg. If you don't have that critical mass, you can't bring in people who will change the dynamic in a way that would.
Absolutely. And, if we're honest with ourselves, we know that structural racism is an issue. And the reality is, if you don't have those diverse points of view in the boardrooms, whether that's corporate America, whether that's in government, whether that's in academia, then you don't have the frame of reference to really address these issues. So a big part of it is we need to invest in the talent in the decision makers. We need to invest in the talent of those that are influencing policy at city government level, again, academia and corporate America. So that is a missing piece that, again, in order to understand these issues, there's the data and then there's the issues of the lived experience. And in order to understand those issues, you have to have a frame of reference. So we have to begin to develop, invest, and attract, diverse talent to this region to address those
Let me ask
issues.
one more question in this area, Stefani, let me ask you, because PolicyLink, which you've worked with, your group has worked with, and we have also done some work with on different analytical issues. I was struck by their report because, on the one hand, you see that incomes are rising here pretty quickly relative to other cities in America, but even amidst that growth, they found that the racial gaps on questions like wages, employment, and poverty were widening, not narrowing. Why are the gaps widening amid growth, kind of the John Kennedy, a rising tide lifts all boats? You're not seeing that as much.
Right, and I think that's the real challenge. 40% of the people in our region who are not in the workforce system, who are looking for jobs, are minorities. So it's a really significant, disproportionate problem. And the other thing we know is
and what would it be the overall population?
What?
What would it be if it's 40% of the
15%?
15, so it's well overrepresented.
Right. So the other issue is that we see stagnation at the lower level jobs. And so we don't see the elevation of the movement up into the system. So if you look at the wages, you're seeing a lot of lower wage minorities in the workforce, and we're not getting them, as Presley's talking about, into executive level, into C-suite, into board level type jobs.
So Andrew, the lesson of the last 5 years, or the last 6 or 7 years here, might be that growth is not sufficient to widen opportunity, but it's certainly necessary. I mean, without growth, you look at places without growth like Newark or Detroit, it's harder to be, at all. So I want to ask you, the technology scene, as you mentioned here, is very dynamic. You work at Carnegie and then Google, now back. Is it self-sustaining at this point? Is this now a driver of wealth and employment indefinitely in the city?
No, absolutely not. I think there are some actually quite serious things coming down the pike for us. And it's important that we don't screw up because, as we've already talked about, a lot of other cities are looking to us as an example of hope. So it's like we're talking about two separate problems which we should be, if we get together, we should be able to cancel out. I am deathly afraid of the lack of people with the qualifications we need to grow Pittsburgh's technology economy further. That isn't just computer science and mathematicians, that's mechanical engineers, people who can build test tracks for autonomous vehicle testing, people who can do marketing campaigns for some of our crazy robotic startups and so forth. And we have a shortage of those folks at the same time as we have this really quite horrible unemployment problem.
Are those all four-year degree jobs, 4-year plus, or are there jobs that are less than 4-year degree in that group?
No, I think they're all professional jobs which will require at least a 2-year degree, but engineering all the way from sort of light engineering through to sort of the detailed folks who can use advanced computation are very much needed there. Do you agree, Jim? Yep.
Yeah. Were you gonna say,
yeah, I was going to say that one of the interesting factors about this technology expansion is that with it, a lot of the traditional companies have not been flexible and accommodating in some of their practices to think about maybe bringing someone in with a 2-year degree, with a different training program. And we've been looking to cities like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, who've been very creative about boot camps and creating an ecosystem of training and creation of talent, and replicating that here has been interesting because we're a little more conservative about our employer base, about how they think about things, and our HR practices and the way traditional business operates has been rather rigid. And so we have to kind of figure out how to infuse some of that new thinking in order to accommodate the innovation.
I want to ask you about the role of culture in creating opportunity and rebuilding downtown, but I want to stick with technology for just one follow-up question. There is a lot of exciting stuff going on at Carnegie Mellon around advanced robotics, right? But when most people hear robotics, I think their first thought is job loss, not job gain. Is that fear misplaced? Can there be job gain around developing advanced robotics?
Yes, if we get it right. I'm very confident about this. We have been working hard on the future of manufacturing, again, all across CMU's campus. One of the things that's very clear is that it's no longer the case that if you've got a good idea of like a new kind of cool desk lamp you want to manufacture, that you have to call up a supplier in China to provide the manual labor to produce that. With advanced technology, you can actually set this up. And what we want to do is create the cottage industry of people doing these kinds of things. And we should be, if you pardon the expression, experimenting on our own population for setting these things up.
Thank you. Among the things that when people in other cities look at Pittsburgh that has made it unique is the role of culture and the arts in driving economic revitalization. Something you said about the founders of the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust in the 80s, quote, in Pittsburgh, it was not the end of the steel industry, in Pittsburgh, it was the end of the steel industry by and large, and people were abandoning the region. Not just the city, but the region in droves. So it's encouraged to say we've lost half our population, but we are going to create this great cultural district. What have you learned about the relationship between arts, culture, and growth?
Well, I think it's very clear that, and many other people have said this, that if it had not been for that cultural district establishment that took place at the absolute lowest point in recent memory in Pittsburgh, you know, the downtown might very well not have made it and would have gone the way of many other cities that we still see now struggling today. So the thing that was different about this is that while the Cultural Trust and its establishment started that, there are now dozens of other organizations and partners around, many of whom are in this room tonight, that are now joined together in that same effort to make the city and the region better. And it is twofold. It is about, you know, as Presley said, you know, what one of the things that draws people to this region is the cultural aspects in all of the ways that you just said, but it's also very much about jobs. I mean, you can't have one without the other. People aren't going to come here without work and without skills and without great education just because we have a great cultural district. We have all these wonderful cultural amenities or wonderful parks and et cetera, libraries, et cetera. You have to have it all. And I think that's a great thing about Pittsburgh, is that we're working collectively to get it all.
So the scale of what you do is enormous, right? I've read that you are involved in some 2,000 annual events that attract 2 million people. That's a lot of people.
We're up to about 2.5 now.
2.5.
2.5 million.
But the thing I think that makes you particularly unique is that you manage more than 1 million square feet of property, including galleries, parking, restaurants, and residency. That role as a real estate owner, I think, is somewhat unique. How did it change? How did it magnify or leverage the impact of arts?
Well, I think that, as the mayor alluded to earlier, one of the most obvious things, and many people that are new to Pittsburgh actually don't realize this, that there was a different kind of entertainment district that existed in the downtown. It was, you know, was the notorious red light district. And I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people that had to kind of change. And I do think that element of owning commercial real estate as well as the art real estate is one of our sort of secret sauces. There's no question about it. We're not unique. There are some other cities around the country that have emulated what we do, but we are very unusual in that aspect of real estate and arts and culture.
Yeah. President, let me ask you, I mean, when you think about the challenge of struggling neighborhoods, and that is what your work is revitalizing neighborhoods. Absolutely. Is the key to bring employment and into those neighborhoods, or is it more to equip the people in those neighborhoods to compete for the jobs that are being created elsewhere in the region?
I think the key is that there's not one single key. I think there's multiple things that have to happen simultaneously, from, you know, bringing the jobs and the training to the neighborhoods, as well as making sure that the residents in the neighborhoods have ownership of the revitalization of their communities. When we talk about the culture, as much as we all love the downtown, the cultural district, and all the work downtown, getting that culture into the neighborhoods in a way that the neighbors and the residents own it and they feel like it's part of their indigenous culture, that's part of the challenge, because when we talk about, obviously, things like gentrification, there's a psychological gentrification, where now residents are now living in neighborhoods that they don't really recognize, whether it's the art, whether it's the culture, whether it's the types of establishments that are in those neighborhoods. So I think it's multifaceted, but absolutely you have to lift up the people as you lift up the market. And we spend a lot of time thinking about it and investing, rightly so, in affordable housing. But in my view, the real victory is when we don't need as much affordable housing.
You have incomes.
And we have incomes rising. And we have residents that believe that a investment in their neighborhood or their business is a good investment. So I think it's really a combination of things that you have to do simultaneously. But first and foremost, you have to lift up the people as you lift up the market.
And let me follow up, because the mayor mentioned something that I had kind of noted. We've been in other cities where growth and bringing, Austin, for example, where gentrification is essentially a zero-sum game. If you bring in a 32-year-old engineer from somewhere, as they move in, almost one for one, they're pushing somebody out. But this is different. I mean, you have a lot of space in the city. You have a lot of vacant land. He mentioned 17,000 properties. Does that give opportunities here that maybe is not available in other places, like a Seattle that is more space constrained?
Absolutely. I think there's tremendous opportunity here for community ownership. So as we have, as you mentioned, and it's been mentioned, we have a lot of vacant land, a lot of vacant structures. We have to position the community to begin to be able to own that. So through the community land trusts that are being developed, through the land bank that's being developed, we've also got to equip residents and stakeholders with the skill to really understand real estate and how to become a part of that revitalization. So I think the key over the next several years, one of the keys is community ownership and increasing the conditions that make community ownership, viable in our neighborhoods.
Let's talk further about kind of this paradox that you mentioned. On the one hand, you have all these people out of the workforce or struggling to find opportunity. On the other hand, you have this shortage. First question: are the schools, the public schools in Pittsburgh, equipping the young people here to compete either for the jobs that are being created or for the slots, the freshman admission slots? You're shaking your head even before I finish. Go ahead.
So I think that's one of the challenges, is that the education system hasn't kept up. And I think what we inherit in terms of trying to find people jobs are a lot of folks who just aren't there. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one kind of alarming statistic. 40% of the youth that we serve, who are kind of under age 24, who have a high school diploma, aren't reading and writing at an 8th grade level. 40%.
Are not reading.
Not reading and writing at an 8th grade level. So they've graduated. We educated them for 12 years through the public school system, and somehow through workforce development programs and other community partners, we have to now bring them back up and get them somehow into the workforce.
Yeah.
I think that's one major problem. The other is, the lack of some of our vocational and technical programs and career education, which has not necessarily kept pace. And so what I think we have in Pittsburgh, our county itself has 43 school districts. So when the mayor talks about the schools, he's talking about the city schools. We have 42 other school districts just in our midst. And several of them are very progressive, and several of them, could use some support. So I think it's about keeping the city schools need to kind of invest a little bit more in their programming and making sure we're also providing paths for people who aren't going to go to college and aligning those with the jobs in our market.
Talk about whether at the university level or in a room like this, to what extent are the young people here being equipped to be part of these changes?
I think we as leaders in Pittsburgh have to be proactive in it. I cannot say that's someone else's problem. I have a heartbreaking but interesting problem that I sometimes face, which is we get applicants to an elite place like Carnegie Mellon from a background which has got no educational infrastructure in one of the rundown areas of Pittsburgh. Some of those students have done things like, in the evenings, they will write out computer programs on pieces of paper with pencil because they don't have a computer at home. But then they'll go and try it out in the school. And their teachers give us great praise for what they've done. And here's what keeps me awake at night. I still can't bring them into my program because by the time they're 17 or 18, they don't have enough skills that we can actually catch up on the math skills. So we're really pushing at among the Carnegie Mellon programs is to try to get down into the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, find those kids, and we need help finding them, and then we will work very hard to get them the skills they need to be able to join the technological elite.
I'll bring in the audience in a minute, but I want to go back to something we were talking about with the mayor, which is that, one of the reasons why Pittsburgh was able to withstand the blows of the 80s and recover was the kind of legacy wealth of the first industrial revolution. All of these great anchor institutions, whether it's foundations or universities, but in the report, our friends at PolicyLink did, and I think your organization was part of this, they raised a question that doesn't get discussed much in many cities. It asked whether the anchor institutions in the cities, most of them tax exempt, are focusing enough on using their procurement dollars to support local businesses and expand local opportunity. The report said, quote, "It is time for Pittsburgh's anchor institutions to step up and develop an intentional procurement strategy." We have some big anchor institutions here on the platform. Is that a fair criticism, and is there more that can be done?
Well, there's always, of course,
there's always more that can be done.
There's always more that can be done, but I do think that particularly in those arts and cultural institutions that I'm familiar with, including the Cultural Trust, there is a bias, internal Pittsburgh regional bias. We are very, very much interested in that, and as others have said, we recognize that that is a part of the mission of what we're trying to do, is not just be self-serving, but help bring more people and more communities involved with us along the way.
What do you think about the question of anchor institutions and their role in generating economic opportunity in the...
I think absolutely. I mean, I think we could see a lot. There's certainly an interest in uplifting the community, but I think there's always more they can do to open their doors to, in my case, individuals who need some upskilling, who need some exposure, who need to know what it means to ride an elevator because they don't do it in their neighborhood.
So, go ahead, Presley.
So obviously I agree.
To help write the report, I think, yes.
And I would say that we really have to really move from talk to action in commitment. And I think when you think about the procurement and the supply chain, it's not only the anchors, which is a huge economic driver, but it's also government, city government, county government. The procurement power alone within city government and the anchors is enormous, and enough to begin to really create wealth, particularly in that supply chain. And our report was focused more on development.
Yeah.
So when you think about literally, I think in excess of $3-4 billion of development last year and probably this year, if you just take the supply chain of those jobs, permanent jobs, construction jobs, suppliers of the products that are being manufactured and built, et cetera, the procurement power is enormous. And I think absolutely we have to go from talking about it to a real commitment and intentional effort to do that.
Let me ask one final thing before I bring in the audience, and Kevin, can I start with you? Because, as we said, I mean, this is a place where many of the efforts have involved the business sector, the educational sector, the civic sector, and the public sector, and government. What have you learned about the relative roles that each of these institutions can play and how they work most profitably together?
Well, I think the answer is what you just said. The one lesson is that working together, more things get done effectively and more quickly. And to me, that is the true mission, is to get all of those sectors on the same page as often as possible and working them together. I know it sounds very trite, but that is really what it's about.
Andrew, in building, you've seen the building of this technology node from several angles. How would you say the relative roles of the different aspects, different sectors here in kind of building that?
I and many of my colleagues spend the time trying to get the very best people in the world who can go and live anywhere to relocate here. And I'm absolutely dependent on what my colleagues here are doing, especially in terms of it just being a nice place to live and it having enriching experiences. That is absolutely necessary.
Do you want anything about?
So we sit as an organization at the intersection of public, private, and business community, and I think for us what we see is that government plays a great role in infusing dollars and ideas and things, but in order to have the flexibility to accommodate the innovation and be able to push the boundaries to serve people like Andrew, we have to have the private to wrap around it so we can continue to innovate and evolve because policies are rigid.
Yeah, let's bring in the audience. We got a question right over there. Coming your way.
Hello. I'm actually the flip side of what you guys are. I'm here representing a community, and we're a community that has a lot to offer. We have a very large immigrant population. We're right off of the T. We're in this city. We want things to happen. We don't want everybody coming in and taking over, like you said, but we want things to happen in our neighborhood. So how do we get invited to your table? What do we need to do? Because if it's, invite you guys out, it's Beachview, Fallowfield, on the T. Come see us.
Gotcha.
Yeah, do you want to?
Well, I would say, we're very much resident and community centered. Everything that we do is centered around the community. And, just alone with the policy link work that we did, I mean, we engaged hundreds of community leaders, hundreds of residents. And, engagement is something that we think can be done and should be done much better. We've got to invest in the communities. We've got to invest in nonprofit community development organizations to be able to do that engagement work. But I think that's critical, and it's vital to the work that we do. So we don't want to wait to be invited. We hope to be in your community as much as we possibly can. But we see communities and residents and stakeholders in the neighborhoods as a vital player, and we want you to have more influence over the work that's getting done.
I've got a business card that I'm going to give you. Come right here.
Yeah.
It's right here. I'll give it to you in just a second.
Go ahead, sir.
So I'm listening to everything that's being said, and I think the one thing that kind of pricked me the wrong way is that there's this belief that in Pittsburgh, even though our educational system, K-12, may leave our kids a little bit behind, there's this sense that they can't catch up, and that there's no way that if they're a little bit behind, that if given a chance, right, that they can catch up. And I think I'm proof that if I had waited until I was ready, or if someone had waited for me to be ready, right, I'd still be sitting at home. So I think there's something missing in where we're not taking enough chances on our young people. And while it can get expensive, right, if they come in and they fail, I think the benefits outweigh the cost. My second point, and then this is kind of my question, is I believe there's a disconnect between what's being talked about in the boardroom and what's happening in the HR department. All right, so our boardroom is saying, we need people, we need people, we need people, but our HR department is looking at job descriptions that require 5 years of experience for an entry-level job. And there's a disconnect. And so our kids, our young people, who maybe have a college degree, maybe have a year of education, are looking at these job descriptions for an entry-level job and saying, I can't do that because I don't have enough experience. And so I think we need to fix that, and I don't know. So I guess my question is, how do we fix that miscommunication between the boardroom and the HR?
So if you don't have a job, I'm ready to hire you because you're speaking my language. This is, so first of all, let me just comment on your first point because it may not have come across right. So I serve about at least 5,000 youth a year, and I spend my whole day and my passion worrying about how I get them back onto a track and how to uplift them. So I actually firmly believe that even if they are behind, that we can help them catch up. And what's amazing about Pittsburgh, because of our philanthropic dollars and because of our community spirit, there are many, 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 many organizations in our midst doing that work. So I'm happy to talk to you more about that. On your second point, that was kind of the point I was making about this disconnect in our human resources practices and in our institutions. And so we've been trying very hard to work at the corporate level, at the C-suite, but to infiltrate, to help them understand how we can be more creative about considering candidates, about rethinking job descriptions. We actually have a lot of work we're doing where we're kind of trying to analyze resumes and words that we see and how we do searches and algorithms on job searches to make sure that we can help those companies and advise them. So it's a really, really big challenge to evolve the system. But I think as we take steps every day, we're doing a better job. I couldn't agree with you more that the disconnect is very much at the level of, the hiring manager versus, the HR system, and you're very much right that that's a challenge that we could use all corporations to help us engage on.
I know we're getting dangerously close to puck drop, but with and it is tempting as a Washington Caps season ticket holder to require you to stay here and miss it. But with Margaret's indulgence, I want to ask one final question, because I mean, really, as we've been talking about, this is one of the most remarkable, in many ways, success stories in a major American city, a place that seemed to be headed toward irrevocable decline, has now reinvented itself without really abandoning its past, kind of showing a reverence for its past, and yet kind of reinventing that for the 21st century. It's an incredible story, but as we said, there are a lot of people who are not part of that, and in some ways, in terms of rising housing prices or displacement, are actually being negatively affected by some of the positive things that are happening. So I was going to ask each of you as kind of a closing thought, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you think have to happen over, kind of the next 10 years or so that there is a wider sense of a broader circle of opportunity in a place that is moving up unequivocally? I'll start with you.
So we've got to do it, and the last comment from the audience really strikes me at my heart, because it's absolutely true that we are trying to hire the best people in the world for very high-tech jobs without having any ramp up for the rest of the falls. What we're doing at Carnegie Mellon is we have a program called SAMS, which is for primarily for African American high school kids who've perhaps been left behind by their high school, to come and actually, in advance of trying to get into this whole technology career progression, get some training, both in the study skills and the access to some of the materials to get into the computer science and engineering worlds. We've doubled that this year, and for the first time, we've concentrated on computer science education. So I think it's very reasonable for the city to hold us accountable for doing our part here.
I think one of the, again, there's multiple things we need to do, but I think from talking more of a neighborhood level, Stephanie will talk more on the system level, but at the neighborhood level, we have to increase opportunities for stakeholders, residents, and local organizations to have ownership. And that means whether that's investing in their ability to invest in what's happening in their neighborhoods, that is increasing their voice and their influence, so through civic engagement, getting residents, building them to the point where they can be in city government and have hold elected official job titles on the school boards, et cetera, so that they can create mobility from a neighborhood level. So I think creating that community voice and power and influence at the resident level, I think it's critical to the sustainability of all of this work.
Stephanie?
So I would say that we really have to take these individuals and put them in the center and wrap the programs around them that way. I think when we work individually, and I just do workforce, and Presley does community development, and someone else does the healthcare, we don't have a way to deploy resources in a unified way, and we have to do a better job of understanding who the people are that are left behind and wrapping the resources around them collectively.
And I guess my again, maybe trite point would be, I think Pittsburgh is the kind of community, it's the scale in this community that an individual, whether they're connected with an organization or not, can make a difference. And I think each of us need to continue to try to make a difference. And we can in this community. I truly believe that an individual, regardless of whether they're running an institution or a part of an institution or not connected with any institution, can actually make a difference to some of these issues we've all talked about. That's the great thing about this city.
Yeah, that's a great note on which to end. Join me in thanking this terrific panel. Margaret, some final thoughts.
Thank you everyone so much for this, that's better, for this very rich and important conversation. We talked about the city's reinvention, a declining industrial city to a growing post-industrial city. As the mayor said, it was the overnight success story that took 30 years. And yet we also heard a lot about the profound disparity that endures, the lack of affordable housing, lack of education, access to education, healthcare. I think it was personified and carried through the whole conversation. That little boy sitting in the front row when the mayor went to read to the first grade class, and it was clear that he was unable to read, and without the kind of intervention and attention that the gentleman in the audience just described, his promise is bound to fade. And yet, sitting here listening to all of you talk about the Pittsburgh way and the spirit of renewal and innovation gives us, I think, a lot to be optimistic about. So thank you for that. Thank you so much to Allstate, and thank you to this audience. You've been an enormously enthusiastic and wonderful audience. We're going to come back to Pittsburgh more often. Please feel free to stay, linger a little longer. I think there's some business cards that need to get exchanged, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.